Picture the scene. A care of the elderly ward. There is a 75-year-old lady called Freya, admitted yesterday for treatment of a chest infection. The doctor asks her how she is, but she doesn't respond. So he leans in further over her bed space and shouts, "How are you feeling today?" She still doesn't respond. He assumes that she is too confused to understand him and moves on to his next patient, frustrated because his ward round is now running late. Freya, in fact, isn't confused. She is deaf. In the noisy ward, over the sounds of call bells, infusion pumps, and conversations, she struggles to make sense of what is happening around her. And she feels terrified. Deaf people are having experiences like this every day in the NHS. There are a range of terms which can be used to describe a person with hearing loss. But for our purposes today, I use deaf to describe any person with any level of hearing loss. Here, in the UK, 1 in 4 adults are deaf, rising to 80% of the over 70s. Look around you today. That represents 1 in every 4 of us. And this will only increase as our population ages. Yet, healthcare professionals do not routinely receive any formal teaching on supporting deaf communication, British Sign Language, or even basic hearing aid or cochlear implant first aid. So simply put, you would struggle to find a doctor who can even switch a hearing aid on. Like many, I have wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. But before I even began applying, countless people told me it wouldn't be possible. You can't put a stethoscope in your ears. How can you possibly be a doctor if you can't use a stethoscope? People would say. And maybe you're wondering that too. At age 16, I called every single medical school in the UK and had to ask if they would accept a deaf person. Most gave a non-committal, we'll have to wait and see. The time came to apply and all seemed well. I did receive offers until one medical school said, "We will give you an offer, in principle, if you can complete the following test. Take your hearing aids out, turn away from the examiner, and repeat a list of words back to them. Pass this test, and the place is yours." Now, this is the same as me asking one of you who wears glasses to read a page without your glasses on. It is impossible, and it is discriminatory. So, fast forward to medical school, and not the aforementioned place. If you want to know where that is, you'll have to ask me after. It did bring many challenges still. Discriminatory language, people assuming I was a patient, not staff, to not getting support with adapted equipment. And if you're still wondering how I use the stethoscope, adapted stethoscopes exist and actually have far superior audio quality and functionality compared to standard ones. So, whilst many barriers are easily overcome with adapted equipment, Others present more of a challenge. The most challenging of all, the attitudes of others. When I was in my final year of medical school, after posting online about some teaching that I had delivered about the experiences of deaf people, I woke up the next morning to a barrage of death threats, all relating to the simple fact that I was about to become a deaf doctor. And worse still, they were from someone from within the NHS. Think about that for a moment. Think about the level of ableism in our society, that someone would threaten to kill you just because you are a disabled person trying to make your way in the world. So, despite all of that, I did make it through training. And with some really good therapy, I am now a good doctor and one who absolutely loves their job. But how many people don't make it this far? How many potentially excellent deaf doctors are we missing out on? And we know that patients love having doctors who they can relate to. The joy that deaf patients experience when they see that I am deaf too is unrivaled. They can feel free and comfortable with me, and I have an empathy for all with communication support needs, which allows me to provide truly accessible care. So, I think we can all agree that the scale of barriers facing deaf staff in the NHS is unacceptable. But patients are having these experiences too. When I qualified, I recognised that the lack of access for all deaf people across the whole NHS was so profound that I set up an organisation called IDA, which aims to transform their experiences by teaching deaf insight. Now, you may have heard of something called deaf awareness, but I don't want you to leave here today just simply being aware that deaf people like me exist, because we do. But to understand our experiences and to have knowledge on how to improve them. So to have insight. And this can only come from learning from someone with lived experience, like me. So let me teach you some simple things now that can make a huge difference so that we can start to improve the lives of deaf people together. Firstly, it is important to understand how to support those whose preferred language is British Sign Language, or BSL. Data shows that in the UK, this is around 25,000 people. Yet, a study I did in a local hospital showed that not a single junior doctor knew how to access BSL interpreters in their trust. There is also a common misconception that if you know BSL, then you also know English. So, if you were going to communicate with someone who uses BSL, that you could avoid the need for a BSL interpreter by writing things down in English. But this isn't true. You wouldn't try and communicate with a French speaker by writing things down in English, or I hope you wouldn't. And this is an equivalent situation. BSL and English are two completely different languages. And while some people know both, understanding of one does not imply understanding of the other. One night, when I was working as a doctor in a busy A&E department, I was called to see a man who was critically unwell having fallen several stories off of scaffolding and landed on his back. When I arrived, I could see he was agitated, rolling around in pain, and surrounded by clinicians, all shouting over one another and at him. I could see he was terrified. I could also see that he was deaf, and that he was signing to those clinicians whilst they continued to shout back at him. I cleared the area, explained in BSL our concerns about a possible spinal cord injury and the desperate need for him to lay still. When I accompanied him for imaging, we discovered that he was millimetres away from severing his spinal cord. Now, he was taken straight to a specialist centre for neurosurgery, and it saved his life. But if those doctors had have known how to access BSL interpreters, or even the basics of BSL themselves, then they would have been empowered to provide this man the equitable care that he deserved. Secondly, whilst understanding of BSL and how to access interpreters is crucial for many, most people with hearing loss in the UK do not use BSL. So how can we support them? How often do you see people shouting at patients, like in Freya's story, or slowing down their speech like this? By doing this, you are not only distorting the sound of your speech, but also your lip pattern too, therefore making it impossible for the deaf person to understand you and likely eroding your relationship too. So at IDA, we teach communication skills rooted in deaf insight. Thirdly, now you are beginning to understand what good communication with deaf people looks like, then ask yourself this. If you were the doctor in Freya's story, would you have been able to help her put her hearing aids in? In my experience, most doctors can't, because they've never been shown how. At IDA, we teach this. A hearing colleague who had attended one of our training sessions told me that she was asked to review an elderly man who was in pain and nobody knew why. On her review, she noticed that he was deaf but hadn't been supported to wear his hearing aids. So she simply changed the batteries and helped him to put his hearing aids in. Her deaf insight meant that he could finally express to her that he thought the hospital had stopped serving dinners and that he was in severe abdominal pain because he was so hungry. What transpired was that catering staff did not know he was deaf. And when they had asked him if he had wanted dinner and received no response, they had assumed the answer was no. He was not being fed. His basic human rights were not being met, just because he was deaf. This is inequality in action. Lastly, we teach on deaf culture and the unique needs of deaf people. I work in palliative care, an area where our communication is often about the most sensitive decisions a person will make in their life, those related to their death and their dying. In my hospice, We use Deaf Insight to empower deaf people with life-limiting illnesses, often for the first time ever, to have their views centred. Deaf people can now say to us, "I don't want any more treatment. I feel ready to die now." And they tell us that they have thought this for a long time, but that nobody has supported them to have these conversations. Can you imagine how empowering that feels? To finally have agency over your own care. We also teach on the unique needs of deaf people at this stage of life. For most people, as they are dying, they will become more and more sleepy. So we ask people, when discussing their advanced care preferences, what matters to you? What do you hope that time will look like? And for deaf people, we must ask, would you like us to help you keep your hearing aids or your implants in? For me, personally, I wear hearing aids and I feel so relaxed without my hearing aids in. I can sleep and relax in peace and complete quiet, and it's amazing. It's one of the many advantages of being deaf. So, when I am dying, I would want my hearing aids out. I would want to relax in that peace and in that quiet. But other patients tell me, no, keep them in. Open my door. Let the sounds of the world reach me as I die. Deaf staff are a fantastic asset to our NHS. And deaf patients deserve the highest quality of care. So to all NHS staff listening to this, I implore you, engage in Deaf Insight, listen to deaf people, centre our views, and you will finally give us what you give hearing people, the lives and the deaths that we deserve. Thank you.